October 3rd, 1849, a man was found wandering the dark streets of Baltimore. He was delirious, he was wearing another man's clothes, and nobody knew where he had been for the previous 6 days. 4 days later, he was dead. This man was Edgar Allan Poe, and nearly 2 centuries later, nobody exactly knows how he died. But before I explain why his death became such a mystery, you first have to understand the life he lived. Born in Massachusetts in 1809, Edgar Allan Poe's life already started off tragically. When he was 1 year old, his father abandoned the family. He simply walked out and was never heard from again. And the following year, his mother got sick with tuberculosis. She died shortly after. Poe was taken in by John and Frances Allen of Richmond. They never formally adopted him, but they gave him their name. While Frances adored him, John never quite accepted Poe as his own. It was a tension that would follow Poe for the rest of his life. Always cared for, but never truly belonging anywhere. At the age of 17, Poe enrolled at the University of Virginia. It should have been the beginning of something great. Instead, it became his first real collapse. John Allen had sent him to a university with barely enough money to cover his fees. No allowance, no support. Poe was surrounded by wealthy students living freely while he struggled to afford basic necessities. So he turned to gambling. He ran up debts he couldn't pay, Allen refused to cover them, and after less than a year, Poe was forced to leave the university. Returning home, he was broke, humiliated, and furious at the man who in his mind had set him up to fail. Then another blow came. His childhood sweetheart Sarah had gotten engaged to someone else while he was away. Her father had been intercepting Poe's letters. She never knew he had written. He was 17 years old and already the world felt like it was closing in on him. With no money and no prospects, Poe did what desperate young men often do. He enlisted in the army under a fake name and left everything behind. He quickly rose to the rank of sergeant major, the highest non-commissioned rank possible, in just 2 years. But still, the army wasn't where he wanted to be. Literature was calling him. In that same year, he quietly published his first collection of poems. It was called Tamerlane and Other Poems. The book sold almost no copies. Nobody noticed, but he kept writing anyway. In 1829, Frances Allen, the woman who had loved Poe since childhood, was dying. The same disease that had taken his mother was now taking her too. Poe rushed back to Richmond to be at her side, but he didn't make it in time. She was gone before he arrived. It was a grief he carried quietly. Frances had been the one person in the Allen household who had always been in his corner. With her gone, whatever bond existed between Poe and John Allen began to unravel completely. But for a brief moment, her death would bring them together. Perhaps softened by the loss, John Allen used his connections to secure Poe a place at the United States Military Academy at West Point. It was 1830. Poe was 21 years old. On the surface, it looked like a fresh start. It wasn't. Poe had no intention of making a career in the military. He had hoped Allen would use the opportunity to finally reconcile with him, to acknowledge him, to support his writing, but that didn't happen. Instead, Allen remarried quickly after Frances's death and made it clear that Poe had no place in his future. Poe was being written out. So he did what he had done before when a situation became unbearable. He engineered his own exit. He stopped attending classes, he skipped drills and formations. He did it deliberately, until the academy had no choice but to court-martial him. In March of 1831, Edgar Allan Poe was formally dismissed from West Point. He was 22 years old, he had no money, no family, no home, and no safety net. John Allen never spoke to him again. Not a single word. For most people, that kind of rejection would be the end of the story. But for Poe, it was just the beginning of one. He moved to Baltimore, moved in with his aunt Maria Clem and her young daughter Virginia, and he started to write again. He would submit stories to magazines and journals. He entered writing competitions. In 1833, he won a short story contest run by the Baltimore Saturday Visitor, gathering the attention of a man named John Pendleton Kennedy. Kennedy was a novelist and a man of influence. He saw something in Poe that most people had overlooked. He opened doors. By 1835, Poe had secured a position as an editor at the Southern Literary Messenger in Richmond. For the first time in his life, he had a steady income, a platform, and a growing reputation. His reviews were sharp, sometimes brutal, and people were paying attention. But something else was happening too. He was falling in love with Virginia. Yes, his cousin Virginia. She was 13 years old, he was 26, and in that same year, they got married. For a few years, life had kind of a fragile stability. Poe was writing more than ever. The Telltale Heart, The Fall of the House of Usher, The Murders in the Rue Morgue, widely considered as the first modern detective story ever written. Things were starting to look up, but he was also drinking. It had been a problem for years, but now it was becoming something harder to ignore. He would disappear for days. He would show up to work erratic and unreliable. He lost his position at the Southern Literary Messenger because of it. He moved from city to city, Richmond to New York, to Philadelphia and back again. Always chasing the next position, the next opportunity, the next fresh start. And Virginia was always there. Quiet, devoted and patient in a way that seemed almost impossible given the chaos around her life. Then in January of 1842, while she was singing at the piano, something burst inside her. She began to hemorrhage from the mouth. It was tuberculosis, the same disease that had taken his mother, the same disease that had taken Francis Allen. Now it was taking his wife. She didn't die straight away. She lingered for 5 years, recovering slightly, then collapsing again, each cycle being worse than the previous one. Poe described these years as the most agonizing of his life. He knew she was dying, he just didn't know when. In January of 1845, while Virginia's coughing fits came and went, Poe published a poem. It was about a man who loses the woman he loves, and a raven that visits him every night just to remind him that she's never coming back. It was called The Raven. It made him famous almost overnight. Newspapers reprinted it everywhere. Poe became, for a moment, the most talked about writer in America. And he still went home to a wife who was dying. He drank through it, he watched the pattern repeat itself for the third time, the woman he loved slipping away and nothing he could do to stop it. Virginia Clem Poe died on January 30th, 1847. She was 24 years old. Poe was destroyed. He fell into a depression so deep that his friends feared he wouldn't survive it. But slowly he began to surface. He started writing again. He began pursuing relationships with other women, perhaps searching for something to hold on to. He even reconnected with his childhood sweetheart, Sarah, now a widow, and by 1849 they were reportedly engaged. For a brief moment, it seemed like Edgar Allan Poe might actually find his way to something resembling a normal life. Then came October 3rd, 1849, and we are back at the beginning. 6 days before, he left Richmond, heading for New York. He was going to collect his belongings and bring them south. He and Sarah were to be married, but he never made it. Somewhere between Richmond and New York, he vanished. For 6 days, nobody knew where he was. Then on October 3rd, a man named Joseph Walker spotted a figure slumped outside a tavern in Baltimore called Gunner's Hall. The man was barely conscious, dressed in cheap, ill-fitting clothes that looked like it didn't belong to him, and completely unable to explain where he had been or what had happened to him. Walker recognized him. It was Edgar Allan Poe. He was rushed to Washington College Hospital and placed under the care of a doctor named John Joseph Moran. He never fully regained consciousness. He drifted in and out of delirium for 4 days, crying out, talking with figures that weren't there, gripped by something that terrified everyone who witnessed it. His last recorded words, spoken in the early hours of October 7th, "Lord, help my poor soul," and then he was gone. The cause of death listed on his death certificate was phrenitis, term for inflammation or swelling of the brain. It explained nothing. In the nearly 2 centuries since, the theories have never stopped. Some doctors believe it was rabies, the delirium, the confusion, the inability to drink water. No animal bite was ever confirmed, but the symptoms fit disturbingly well. Others point to alcohol. Poe had struggled with drinking for most of his adult life. Some believe what killed him wasn't the alcohol itself, but the absence of it. Then there's the theory that has everything to do with where he was found. Gunner's Hall, the tavern where he was discovered, was a polling location. And it just happened to be election day. In 19th century Baltimore, gangs would kidnap unsuspecting men, force-feed them alcohol, and march them from poll to vote multiple times under different names. Each time the victim's clothes would be swapped, so he wouldn't be recognized. It's called cooping. And to this day, some believe Poe wasn't a drunk wandering the streets, but was a victim of it. Many theories, many different guesses, but the truth is, nobody knows. And perhaps that is most fitting for a man who built his life's work around mystery, around darkness, around the things that cannot be explained. Edgar Allan Poe died penniless. His estate was worth nothing, his reputation at the time of his death was complicated, brilliant in the eyes of some, unstable and unreliable in the eyes of others. His literary executor, a man named Rufus Griswold, despised him personally and wasted no time in publishing a damaging obituary under a fake name, portraying Poe as a drunk and a madman. For years, that was the version of Poe that stuck, but the writing survived. It always does. He spent his entire life feeling like he didn't belong anywhere. And yet he belongs everywhere. In every crime novel ever written, in every horror film. He was born into loss. He lived inside it. He wrote his way through it. And on an October morning in Baltimore with no explanation and no witnesses, he was gone. Just like that. Lord help my poor soul.